The easiest way to discover who people really are is simple. Give them someone they believe has no power. On a bright Monday morning in downtown Seattle, nobody paid attention to the man pushing a janitor's cart through the glass lobby of Hayes Technologies. Nobody except one woman. What happened over the next few weeks would expose hidden ambition, quiet kindness, and a secret that would leave an entire company speechless. But before we begin, thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy stories about unexpected twists, powerful life lessons, and unforgettable romances, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories and even better experiences in the videos ahead. Now, let's begin. At exactly 8:12 a.m., the revolving doors of Hayes Technologies spun open as employees rushed into the building carrying laptops, coffee cups, and the stress of another workweek. The 40-story headquarters overlooked Elliott Bay, a shining symbol of innovation and success. Thousands dreamed of working there. Few ever imagined who truly owned it. Standing quietly near the front desk was Alexander Hayes, founder, Billionaire CEO, and one of the youngest tech leaders in America. Today, however, nobody would recognize him. His tailored suits were gone. His luxury watch remained locked away. Instead, he wore navy work pants, a gray maintenance shirt, and a simple badge that read Alex Facilities. For months, Alexander had become increasingly concerned about reports describing a toxic culture spreading inside his company. Employee surveys painted one picture. Financial reports painted another. Executives insisted everything was excellent. Alexander trusted facts more than presentations. So he decided to see the truth for himself. He would spend several weeks undercover as a janitor. If people revealed their true character around someone they considered invisible, he intended to watch every moment. The experiment began sooner than expected. As Alexander rolled his cart across the marble lobby floor, a group of managers walked past without acknowledging him. One brushed his shoulder and continued talking without apology. Another dropped a napkin beside a trash can and kept moving. Alexander simply observed. He had expected some indifference. What surprised him was how natural it seemed. Then came Vanessa Cole. The senior HR director entered through the front doors carrying an oversized latte and talking loudly on her phone. Several employees immediately greeted her. Vanessa enjoyed attention. She also enjoyed reminding people of their place. While gesturing dramatically during her conversation, she turned sharply and her coffee splashed across the front of Alexander's maintenance shirt. Brown stains spread down the fabric. The lobby fell silent for half a second. A few nearby employees exchanged uncomfortable looks. Vanessa glanced down. "Watch where you're standing," she said coldly before returning to her phone call. A couple of people laughed nervously. Nobody moved. Nobody offered help. Nobody challenged her. Alexander lowered his eyes and reached for paper towels. Then he heard a woman's voice. Actually, I think he was standing perfectly still. Alexander looked up. Walking toward him was Charlotte Bennett. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and held a stack of folders against her chest. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the cart and handed him a folded blue handkerchief from her purse. "Here," she said gently. "This should help before the stain sets." Vanessa frowned, but continued toward the elevators. Charlotte ignored her completely. "Are you okay?" she asked. Alexander accepted the handkerchief. "I'm fine," he answered. "Thank you." She smiled warmly. Everyone deserves a better start to Monday than that. For the first time all morning, Alexander smiled back. Around them, employees resumed their routines as if nothing had happened. But something important had happened. The billionaire conducting a secret test had just met the first person who treated him like a human being. And as Charlotte disappeared into the crowd of rushing professionals, Alexander carefully folded the blue handkerchief and placed it inside his pocket, unaware that this small act of kindness would become the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. Over the next several days, Alexander Hayes learned something fascinating about human nature. Most people never looked directly at him. They looked through him. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, pushing his maintenance cart through silent hallways while the city lights reflected across the glass walls of Hayes Technologies. By 8 o'clock, the building transformed into a sea of rushing employees. Executives hurried toward meetings. Managers carried laptops under their arms. Phones hung. Elevators opened and closed nonstop. Yet the man cleaning conference rooms seemed invisible to nearly everyone. Alexander noticed everything. He noticed the vice president who smiled warmly at board members but ignored receptionists. He noticed the manager who constantly spoke about leadership while leaving messes for others to clean. He noticed employees who treated maintenance workers like furniture. The deeper he moved into the company, the clearer the picture became. Reports and presentations could hide problems. Everyday behavior could not. Each evening, Alexander recorded observations inside a small black notebook he kept hidden in his supply closet. Names, situations, reactions. Every detail mattered. He was not looking for perfection. He was looking for character. And one name appeared in the notebook more than any other. Charlotte Bennett. It started with small things. The morning after the coffee incident, Alexander was replacing trash liners near the employee lounge when he heard a nervous voice. A young intern stood near the coffee machine, staring helplessly at a printer error message on her laptop. Several employees walked past without stopping. Charlotte paused immediately. Although she was carrying her own workload, she sat beside the intern and spent 15 minutes helping her prepare a presentation before an important meeting. She asked for nothing in return. Later that afternoon, Alexander watched Charlotte leave the cafeteria carrying 2 lunch containers instead of 1. Curious, he followed from a distance. She entered the security office and handed the second container to an older security guard working through his break. The man smiled gratefully. Charlotte simply wished him a good afternoon and left before he could thank her again. Another note went into the notebook. 2 days later, Alexander found himself cleaning a conference room after a difficult executive meeting. Raised voices had filled the room earlier. Now discarded documents covered the table. As he worked, Charlotte entered carrying files. She immediately began helping gather papers. "You do not have to do that," Alexander said. "I know," she replied with a smile. "But it will take half the time if 2 people do it." Her answer stayed with him long after she left. Most people helped when they expected recognition. Charlotte helped because she believed it was the right thing to do. By Friday afternoon, Alexander had documented dozens of examples. None were dramatic. None would appear in company newsletters. Yet each revealed something valuable. Character was often hidden inside ordinary moments. The following week brought a new observation. A severe rainstorm rolled across Seattle, covering downtown streets in gray clouds and steady rainfall. Employees gathered near windows throughout the building watching water stream down the glass. Around 6 in the evening, most workers hurried toward parking garages before traffic worsened. Alexander finished cleaning a meeting room and headed toward the lobby. There he noticed Charlotte standing beneath the entrance awning. She held a compact umbrella, but had not left. A few feet away, a temporary contractor searched frantically through his pockets. The man looked stressed. His rideshare application was not working and his phone battery had died. Several people passed him without stopping. Charlotte approached immediately. After a brief conversation, she used her own phone to arrange transportation for him and waited until the vehicle arrived safely. The contractor thanked her repeatedly. Charlotte shrugged and smiled. Everyone needs help sometimes. Alexander watched the exchange from across the lobby. He felt something unexpected. Admiration. Genuine admiration. The experiment had been designed to expose weaknesses inside the company. Instead, it was slowly revealing someone remarkable. That evening, Alexander sat alone inside a maintenance office reviewing his notebook. Nearly every page contained examples of selfishness, arrogance, or indifference. Yet scattered among those entries were stories involving Charlotte. Small acts, quiet choices, consistent kindness. As he closed the notebook, his eyes drifted toward the carefully folded blue handkerchief resting inside his locker. He had kept it there since the first day. For reasons he could not fully explain, he smiled. Then a question entered his mind for the first time. If Charlotte ever discovered who he really was, Would she remain exactly the same person she seemed to be now? He did not know the answer. But for the first time since beginning the undercover experiment, Alexander realized he wanted to find out. The third week of Alexander's undercover experiment began with a realization that surprised him more than anything he had witnessed so far. The people who spoke most often about values were not always the people who practiced them. Every hallway conversation seemed to reinforce that lesson. Posters throughout Hayes Technologies displayed slogans about teamwork, respect, and innovation. Conference rooms carried inspirational names. Executives delivered polished speeches about company culture. Yet Alexander continued to observe a growing gap between words and actions. That gap was exactly why he kept filling page after page inside his small black notebook. Each morning before employees arrived, he reviewed previous observations. Some entries documented simple discourtesies. Others revealed patterns that concerned him. Several department heads consistently shifted responsibility when problems appeared. Certain managers seemed more interested in protecting their image than helping their team succeed. Meanwhile, Charlotte Bennett continued appearing in the notebook for entirely different reasons. Her entries never involved speeches or recognition. They involved choices, quiet choices, consistent choices, the kind of choices people made when nobody important was watching, or at least when they believed nobody important was watching. One Tuesday morning, Alexander decided it was time for a more deliberate test. So far, he had mostly observed natural behavior. Now he wanted to examine how employees responded under pressure. Working closely with a trusted member of the legal department who knew his true identity, Alexander arranged a simple situation. A sealed company envelope containing non-confidential project documents would be accidentally misplaced near a busy collaboration area on the 22nd floor. The envelope appeared important. Several employees would notice it. Their reactions would reveal far more than the documents themselves. Shortly after 9 o'clock, the test began. Alexander quietly placed the envelope beside a seating area and continued cleaning nearby workstations. Within minutes, a marketing manager spotted it. He picked it up, examined the label, looked around, then set it back down and walked away. 10 minutes later, another employee noticed it and simply stepped around it. A third person glanced at the envelope and took a photograph with a phone before continuing toward meeting. Nobody attempted to identify its owner. Nobody reported it. Alexander wrote brief notes in his notebook. Then Vanessa Cole arrived. The human resources director immediately recognized the envelope as something potentially important. Instead of turning it in, she carried it into her office. Through the glass wall, Alexander watched her inspect the contents. After several minutes, she called another manager and speculated about which department might be responsible. Rather than solving the issue directly, she seemed more interested in gathering information that could be useful later. Another notebook entry followed. Around noon, Charlotte entered the collaboration area, carrying a tablet and several folders. She noticed the empty spot where the envelope had been lying and casually asked a nearby employee if someone had found misplaced document package. Nobody knew. Most did not care. Charlotte frowned slightly. If it belonged to a project team, they're probably looking for it, she said. Instead of moving on, she began asking questions. Within 20 minutes, she traced the envelope to Vanessa's office. She knocked politely and explained that a project coordinator had been searching for missing documents all morning. Vanessa seemed annoyed by the interruption. "It is being handled," she replied sharply. Charlotte remained respectful but persistent. "Then I can deliver it for them. They have a deadline this afternoon." Reluctantly, Vanessa handed over the envelope. Charlotte personally returned it to the coordinator who had been anxiously searching multiple floors. The coordinator thanked her repeatedly. Charlotte simply smiled and returned to work. Watching from across the department, Alexander felt increasingly certain about his conclusions. Charlotte never looked for praise. In fact, she often avoided attention altogether. Yet when responsibility appeared, she stepped toward it rather than away from it. Later that afternoon, another unexpected moment occurred. Alexander was replacing supplies in a break room when Charlotte entered carrying a box of donated school materials. Crayons, notebooks, pencils, and children's books filled the container. "What is all that?" Alexander asked. Charlotte laughed softly. "A community center asked for donations. A few of us are collecting supplies." She glanced inside the box. "We still need more notebooks, but it is a good start." Alexander nodded. "You seem to help a lot of people." Charlotte appeared slightly embarrassed by the comment. "Most people would help if they noticed the need," she answered. "Sometimes they are just busy." After she left, Alexander sat alone for several moments. He had spent years building billion-dollar companies, negotiating major acquisitions, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees. Yet somehow this woman continued teaching him something important. Character was not measured during extraordinary moments. Character revealed itself in ordinary ones. That evening, he opened the black notebook again. Beneath Charlotte's name, he added a new sentence. "Does the right thing even when there is no reward." Then he closed the cover and stared through the office window at the Seattle skyline. The experiment was no longer producing random observations. A pattern was emerging. And for the first time, Alexander suspected that the most valuable discovery inside. His company might not be hidden in a report, a balance sheet, or an executive meeting. It might be a woman who had no idea the janitor she greeted each day was carefully watching everything. Seattle entered one of those rainy stretches that seemed determined to last forever. For nearly a week, low clouds hung over the city while cold drops traced endless paths down the towering windows of Hayes Technologies. Most employees complained about the weather. Alexander secretly appreciated it. Rain had a way of slowing people down just enough to reveal who they really were. On Thursday evening, long after many offices had emptied, Alexander pushed his maintenance cart through the 26th floor. The lights were dimmed. Most conference rooms sat empty. Only a few employees remained, racing to finish projects before the weekend. As he rounded a corner, he noticed a familiar figure standing alone near the window overlooking Elliott Bay. Charlotte. She stared out at the rain while reviewing notes on a tablet. Her shoulders looked heavier than usual. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed tired. Truly tired. Alexander hesitated before approaching. "Still working?" he asked. Charlotte glanced up and smiled. "Unfortunately." She looked toward the storm outside. "I missed my chance to leave before traffic became a disaster." Alexander chuckled softly. "Seattle traffic always wins." Charlotte laughed. "That is probably true." For a moment, they stood together watching headlights move slowly below like streams of light through the rain. Unlike most people in the company, Charlotte never seemed uncomfortable speaking with him. She never rushed conversations. She never treated him as if his job made him less important. "Can I ask you something?" she suddenly said. "Of course. Do you ever wonder if people become different once they get enough power?" Alexander nearly smiled at the irony. "Why do you ask?" Charlotte folded her arms. "Sometimes I look around this building and wonder if success changes people or if it simply reveals who they always were." The question lingered between them. Alexander found himself genuinely curious about her answer. "What do you think?" he asked. Charlotte considered the question carefully. "I think power works like a spotlight. Good people become more generous. Selfish people become more selfish. The money is not really the cause. It just removes excuses." Alexander felt the observation land with surprising force. During years of running billion-dollar companies, he had met countless executives, investors, and entrepreneurs. Few expressed such insight with such simplicity. Before he could respond, Charlotte's phone vibrated. Her expression changed immediately after reading the message. Concern replaced calm. "Everything okay?" Alexander asked gently. She nodded at first, then sighed. "My mother." Her voice softened. "She has been dealing with health problems for a while. Nothing life-threatening, thankfully, but some days are harder than others." Alexander listened quietly. Charlotte rarely spoke about herself. "I try to help as much as I can," she continued. "Appointments, medication schedules, groceries. Whatever she needs." She smiled faintly. "She spent most of her life taking care of me. It feels right to return the favor." Alexander noticed something important. There was no bitterness in her voice. No complaint. Only love and responsibility. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, the vast office floor felt strangely peaceful. For several minutes, they talked about ordinary things. Favorite coffee shops, childhood memories, books they enjoyed reading. The conversation flowed naturally, free from titles, status, or expectations. It was the first genuine conversation Alexander had experienced in weeks that was completely disconnected from business. Eventually, Charlotte checked the time and laughed. I should probably head home before the roads become worse. As they walked toward the elevator together, she suddenly stopped. Wait here. She hurried to her desk and returned carrying a small, insulated container. What is that? Alexander asked. Homemade soup. She handed it to him. You're always working late. I figured you might forget dinner. Alexander stared at the container for a second. No executive gift basket. No expensive gesture. Just simple thoughtfulness. You did not have to do that. Charlotte smiled. I know. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Have a good night, Alex. Then the doors closed. Alexander stood alone, holding the warm container in his hands. For a long moment, he remained completely still. Across the city, billions of dollars moved through markets carrying his name. Investors sought his attention. Journalists requested interviews. Yet somehow the gesture affecting him most was a container of homemade soup from a woman who believed he cleaned office floors for a living. Later that night, sitting alone in the small maintenance office, Alexander opened his black notebook. Beneath Charlotte's growing list of observations, he added another entry. Kind when nobody benefits. Genuine when nobody is watching. Then he closed the notebook and looked toward the blue handkerchief resting beside it. For the first time since beginning the undercover experiment, his interest in Charlotte was becoming something far more personal than professional curiosity. The following Monday brought an announcement that immediately changed the atmosphere inside Hayes Technologies. An executive promotion review was approaching, and department leaders were scrambling to strengthen their positions before final evaluations began. Conversations that once seemed friendly suddenly became strategic. Employees measured every interaction. Managers sought visibility. Ambition filled the building like electricity before a storm. From his position behind a janitor's cart, Alexander watched it all unfold. More importantly, he watched what happened to Charlotte. During the previous month, several team leaders had quietly recommended her for a new operations coordinator position. The role carried greater responsibility, better pay, and a schedule flexible enough to help with her mother's medical appointments. Based on performance alone, Charlotte was one of the strongest candidates. Unfortunately, performance was not the only factor influencing decisions. One afternoon, Alexander entered an empty conference room to replace supplies. Through the partially open door connecting to the adjacent office, he overheard a conversation between Brandon Reed and Vanessa Cole. Neither realized anyone was nearby. Charlotte Bennett keeps appearing on recommendation lists, Brandon said with obvious annoyance. Vanessa sighed. I know. 3 departments submitted positive evaluations. Brandon leaned back in his chair. She is competent, but she is not leadership material. Based on what? Vanessa asked. Brandon laughed lightly. She spends too much time helping people. Leaders make hard decisions. They do not babysit interns and solve everyone's problems. Alexander quietly recorded the exchange in his memory. Then Brandon added something even more revealing. Besides, I already have someone else in mind for the promotion. Vanessa nodded knowingly. The conversation moved on, but Alexander had heard enough. Merit was being replaced by favoritism. Later that week, evidence began appearing. Important project meetings suddenly took place without Charlotte receiving invitations. Reports she normally handled were reassigned. A presentation she helped prepare was delivered by someone else who accepted the credit. Charlotte noticed the changes but remained professional. She continued working hard, refusing to complain. One evening, Alexander found her alone reviewing spreadsheets near the end of her shift. Long day, he asked. Charlotte smiled tiredly. Long week. She rubbed her eyes briefly. Have you ever felt like you're running a race where someone keeps moving the finish line? Alexander knew exactly what she meant. Maybe the race is revealing who belongs at the finish line, he replied. Charlotte laughed softly. That sounds like something from a motivational poster. Maybe. He smiled. but I think it is true. She studied him for a second. You know, Alex, sometimes you give surprisingly good advice. If only she knew. The next morning, another development caught Alexander's attention. While cleaning near the finance department, he noticed inconsistencies in several printed budget summaries left beside a copier. Numbers did not match approved allocation reports he remembered reviewing months earlier as CEO. Certain expenses appeared unusually large. Vendor payments seemed duplicated. The discrepancies were subtle but real. Alexander photographed the documents using a secure company device connected to his private investigation team. Within 48 hours, preliminary findings confirmed his suspicion. Funds had been redirected through questionable consulting contracts. The trail led alarmingly close to Brandon's division. Alexander remained calm. The undercover experiment had started as a cultural assessment. It was rapidly becoming something larger. Meanwhile, Charlotte unknowingly stepped closer to the same truth. During a routine assignment, she discovered project expense figures that conflicted with records from another department. Believing it was a simple accounting mistake, she prepared a report and submitted questions through official channels. She expected clarification. Instead, she received silence. The following day, a manager instructed her to stop reviewing the matter. Charlotte politely asked why. The answer was vague and dismissive. For the first time, genuine concern appeared in her eyes. That evening, Alexander updated the black notebook. The pages now contained more than observations about kindness and character. They contained patterns, names, decisions, connections. At the center stood Brandon Reed. Nearby stood Vanessa Cole. And unexpectedly close to the truth stood Charlotte Bennett. As Alexander closed the notebook, he understood something important. The next stage of his test was no longer theoretical. Someone inside the company was protecting secrets. Someone else was unknowingly uncovering them. And unless he moved carefully, the woman he admired most might soon become the target of people with far more to lose than a missed promotion. The tension inside Hayes Technologies grew steadily throughout the following week. Most employees sensed that something unusual was happening, even if they could not identify the cause. Meetings were becoming more secretive. Certain managers seemed unusually nervous. Conversations stopped whenever unexpected people entered a room. Alexander noticed every detail. The investigation team, working quietly behind the scenes, had already confirmed several financial irregularities connected to Brandon Reed's division. The evidence was growing stronger each day. Yet Alexander remained undercover. The time for answers was approaching, but not yet. First, he needed to understand how far certain people were willing to go to protect themselves. Unfortunately, Charlotte Bennett was about to find out first. It began with a routine audit request. While reviewing project documentation, Charlotte discovered another discrepancy involving vendor payments. Unlike the previous inconsistency she had reported, this one was impossible to ignore. Several approval records appeared to have been modified after final authorization. The changes redirected funds between departments without proper documentation. Believing the issue might expose a serious accounting mistake, Charlotte carefully prepared a summary and submitted it through official compliance channels. She expected questions. Instead, she received a warning. 2 days later, her supervisor called her into a private office. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When Charlotte emerged, her expression had changed. She looked confused more than angry. Later that afternoon, Alexander found her sitting alone in an empty break room, staring at her untouched coffee. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Charlotte attempted a smile, but failed. "Have you ever done exactly what company policy tells you to do, and somehow ended up being treated like you caused the problem?" Alexander sat across from her. "What happened?" She hesitated before answering. "Apparently, I've been asking questions that certain people think are unnecessary." "And are they unnecessary?" Charlotte shook her head immediately. "No, the numbers do not make sense." She sighed heavily. "Maybe I should have stayed quiet." Alexander looked directly at her. If everyone stayed quiet when something seemed wrong, nothing would ever improve. Charlotte studied him for a moment. "You always make things sound simple." "Sometimes they're simple," Alexander replied. Doing the right thing is usually clear. The difficult part is accepting the consequences. Those words lingered in Charlotte's mind long after she returned to work. Unfortunately, the consequences arrived faster than either of them expected. By Thursday, morning rumors began spreading through the office. Employees whispered about missing documents connected to a financial review. Nobody knew exactly what had happened. What surprised Charlotte was hearing her own name attached to the story. At first, she dismissed it as misunderstanding. Then she received an email requesting her presence at an internal review meeting. The accusations stunned her. According to preliminary findings, confidential financial files had allegedly been accessed through credentials connected to her department. Charlotte immediately denied any wrongdoing. She offered complete cooperation. She volunteered access to every project she had handled. None of it seemed to matter. Someone had carefully created a trail pointing toward her. Alexander recognized the setup almost immediately. The timing was too convenient. The accusations appeared only days after Charlotte raised concerns about financial discrepancies. The pattern was obvious. Someone wanted a distraction. Someone wanted credibility destroyed before uncomfortable questions reached senior leadership. The deeper investigation team quickly reached the same conclusion. Several electronic records appear manipulated. Login timestamps have been altered. Approval histories contained suspicious revisions. The evidence against Charlotte looked convincing on the surface, but collapsed under professional examination. The problem was that few people had access to that information yet. Inside the company, perception moved faster than truth. Throughout Friday, employees watched Charlotte differently. Some avoided eye contact. Others exchanged whispers when she passed. A few quietly offered support, but most remained silent. Alexander observed the reactions carefully. Another test was unfolding, one he had never planned. Who would stand beside someone facing public suspicion, and who would distance themselves to protect their own reputation? The answers were revealing. Near the end of the day, Charlotte packed her belongings more slowly than usual. The confidence that normally defined her seemed shaken. As she prepared to leave, Alexander approached carrying a supply cart. "You still believe I'm innocent, right?" she asked quietly. The question surprised him. Without hesitation, he answered. Charlotte looked away briefly, blinking back emotion. "Thank you." She laughed softly. "Strange. Everyone else seems uncertain, but somehow the janitor is the person who trusts me most." Alexander felt the weight of the moment. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to reveal his identity, explain the investigation, and end her anxiety immediately. But doing so now could jeopardize the entire operation. So instead, he said something else. Truth has a way of surviving longer than lies. Charlotte nodded slowly. "I hope you are right." As she walked toward the elevator, Alexander watched the doors close behind her. Then he opened his black notebook one more time. Beneath Brandon Reed's name, he wrote a single sentence. "Will sacrifice innocent people to protect himself." Beneath Charlotte's name, he added another. "Remains honest, even when honesty becomes expensive." Then he closed the notebook. The final stage was approaching. Very soon, the entire company would learn the truth. The only question remaining was how many people would regret underestimating both the woman they tried to frame and the man they believed was only a janitor. Monday arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation hanging over Hayes Technologies. An all-company meeting had been scheduled for 11 o'clock in the main auditorium. Officially, leadership described it as an important organizational update. Unofficially, rumors were spreading through every floor of the building. Employees whispered near coffee stations. Messages circulated through private chats. Most believed the meeting would address the ongoing compliance investigation. Many expected someone to be blamed. By 10:45, nearly every seat inside the auditorium was occupied. Department heads sat near the front. Managers clustered together in tense conversation. Brandon Reed appeared unusually confident as he greeted colleagues and shook hands. Vanessa Cole wore the calm expression of someone convinced events were unfolding exactly as planned. Neither noticed Alexander, standing quietly near the rear entrance in his maintenance uniform. To everyone else, he was still Alex the janitor. Invisible, Unimportant. Easy to ignore. Then Charlotte entered. The room seemed to shift the moment she appeared. Conversations softened. Eyes followed her movement through the aisle. Some people offered sympathetic smiles. Others looked away entirely. The accusations against her had not been proven, but public opinion had already begun forming conclusions. Charlotte felt every glance. She took a seat near the side of the auditorium and focused on the stage, refusing to show how uncomfortable she felt. For several days, she had cooperated fully with investigators. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet uncertainty carried its own burden. At exactly 11 o'clock, Brandon stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. He thanked everyone for attending and spoke about accountability, integrity, and protecting company values. Alexander listened from the back with growing disappointment. Few things bothered him more than hearing noble words used to disguise selfish motives. Brandon continued speaking for several minutes before shifting toward the subject everyone expected. Recent events have challenged our organization, he announced. Unfortunately, evidence has revealed serious concerns involving internal document handling and financial oversight. Murmurs spread across the audience. Brandon paused dramatically. Then he said the words Charlotte had feared hearing. "Charlotte Bennett, would you please join us on stage?" Hundreds of eyes turned immediately. Charlotte felt her heartbeat accelerate. Slowly she stood and walked toward the front. The distance seemed much longer than usual. Each step echoed through the silent auditorium. When she reached the stage, Brandon offered a practiced expression of disappointment. "Charlotte," he began, "this company trusted you." The statement hit like a punch despite its calm delivery. Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. "I have cooperated with every request," she replied, "because I have nothing to hide." Brandon nodded as if indulging a child. "That is for the review process to determine." Vanessa sat in the front row watching quietly. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Something about the presentation felt wrong. The conclusions seemed premature. Yet nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged the narrative. Charlotte suddenly understood something painful. People who had praised her work for years were willing to remain silent while her reputation was questioned in public. Her eyes scanned the audience. Familiar faces looked uncertain. Some appeared embarrassed. Others simply avoided eye contact. Then she noticed one person standing near the back. Alex. Unlike everyone else, he never looked away. His expression remained steady and calm. Somehow that small detail gave her strength. Brandon continued speaking about policy violations and organizational standards. Every sentence pushed the implication further without presenting actual proof. It was a carefully constructed performance designed to create a conclusion before facts could catch up. Finally, Brandon turned toward the audience. "Leadership requires difficult decisions," he declared. "Today we demonstrate that no employee stands above accountability." The auditorium remained silent. Tension filled every corner of the room. Brandon believed victory was seconds away. Vanessa believed the problem had been contained. Charlotte believed her career might be ending. Only one person knew the truth. Standing beside the rear doors, Alexander slipped a hand into his pocket and touched the small blue handkerchief Charlotte had given him weeks earlier. Then he looked toward the stage, toward the people who had underestimated both him and the woman beside them. The time for observation was over. The time for judgment had arrived. For several seconds after Brandon finished speaking, the auditorium remained perfectly silent. Charlotte stood alone on stage, surrounded by hundreds of employees and weighed down by accusations she knew were false. Brandon seemed satisfied. Vanessa looked relieved. Around the room, people waited for the final announcement they assumed was coming. Then a calm voice broke the silence. "I think we should review all the facts before reaching conclusions." Heads turned immediately toward the back of the auditorium. Alexander stepped away from the rear entrance and began walking slowly down the center aisle. At first, nobody paid much attention. After all, he was only the janitor. Brandon frowned with visible irritation. "This meeting is restricted to company personnel involved in the review process." Alexander continued walking. "Good," he replied evenly. Because I'm very involved in the review process. Confusion spread across the audience. Charlotte stared at him in surprise. Something about his voice sounded different. More confident. More authoritative. Brandon forced a laugh. Alex, this is not the time. Alexander stopped directly in front of the stage. Actually, Brandon, it is exactly the time. He stepped onto the platform. The room became completely silent again. Every eye followed him. Then something unexpected happened. The massive screen behind the stage suddenly changed. The company logo disappeared. In its place appeared a photograph. Alexander Hayes, founder, chief executive officer, chairman of Hayes Technologies. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The image remained glowing across the enormous screen. Then dozens of gasps erupted throughout the auditorium. Several employees literally rose from their seats. Phones slipped from nervous hands. Vanessa's face drained of color. Brandon froze. Charlotte looked from the screen to the man standing beside her. Then back again. The realization hit her all at once. Alex, the janitor, the man she had shared coffee with, the man she had trusted, the man she had defended. He was Alexander Hayes, the billionaire founder of the company. Alexander calmly removed the facilities badge from his shirt pocket and placed it on the podium. Good morning, everyone. His voice carried effortlessly across the auditorium. For the past 6 weeks, I have worked inside this building under a different identity. The room remained stunned. I wanted to understand our culture without presentations, prepared reports, or filtered explanations. I wanted the truth. His eyes swept across the audience. And I found it. A second screen appeared beside the first. Documents filled the display. Financial records, approval logs, internal communications, audit findings. The evidence Alexander's team had spent weeks collecting now stood before the entire company. The accusations against Charlotte Bennett are false. His statement landed with the force of a thunderclap. Charlotte felt her breath catch. Alexander continued. Multiple records were manipulated to create the appearance of misconduct. Independent investigators confirmed the alterations. More documents appeared. Timestamp analyses, transaction histories, authorization trails. Every piece carefully verified. Brandon's confidence vanished visibly. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward the floor. Alexander turned toward them. His voice never rose. He did not need anger. Facts were enough. The investigation uncovered unauthorized financial transfers hidden within consulting contracts connected to Brandon Reed's division. Another slide appeared. Additional evidence demonstrates efforts to redirect accountability toward an innocent employee after questions were raised regarding those transactions. Murmurs swept through the auditorium. People exchanged shocked glances. The truth was impossible to ignore. For weeks, rumors had targeted Charlotte. Now reality stood exposed in front of everyone. Alexander paused before speaking again. Leadership is not about protecting yourself. Leadership is about protecting what is right. Then he looked directly toward Charlotte. And throughout this entire process, Charlotte Bennett did exactly that. She felt every eye in the room turned toward her again. This time the expressions were different. Respect replaced suspicion. Admiration replaced doubt. Alexander faced the audience. While others avoided responsibility, she accepted it. While others remained silent, she asked difficult questions. While others protected their careers, she protected the company's integrity. Several employees began applauding. Then more joined. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted into applause. Charlotte stood speechless. Tears threatened to appear, but she fought to maintain composure. Alexander smiled gently. The review process concerning Charlotte Bennett is officially closed. More applause followed. Effective immediately, Brandon Reed and Vanessa Cole are no longer employed by Hayes Technologies. The room fell silent once more. Not because people were shocked by the decision, because they finally understood its significance. Accountability had arrived. Justice had arrived. The truth had arrived. Alexander looked across the audience one final time. I began this experiment searching for leaders. What I discovered was something far more valuable. His eyes briefly met Charlotte's. Character. And for the first time since entering the company disguised as a janitor, Alexander Hayes stood before everyone exactly as himself. 3 months later, Hayes Technologies felt like a completely different company. The changes were visible from the moment employees entered the building. Communication was more open. Departments collaborated more freely. Recognition was based on contribution instead of politics. Most importantly, people had learned a lesson they would not soon forget. Character mattered. Respect mattered. The way people treated those with no obvious power mattered more than anyone had realized. For Alexander Hayes, the undercover experiment had accomplished far more than he originally intended. The financial misconduct had been uncovered. Accountability had been restored. New leadership standards had been implemented across the organization. Yet none of those achievements occupied his thoughts as much as one particular person: Charlotte Bennett. Following the investigation, Charlotte had been promoted to operations director, a position she had earned long before anyone finally acknowledged it. Her new office overlooked Elliott Bay, but she remained exactly the same person she had always been. She still greeted receptionists by name. She still helped interns prepare presentations. She still carried extra coffee when she knew someone was working late. Success had not changed her because kindness was never an act. It was simply who she was. One sunny Friday afternoon, Charlotte stood near the large conference room preparing materials for a leadership workshop. Through the glass wall, she noticed Alexander approaching. Unlike before, he no longer wore maintenance uniforms. Today, he looked exactly like the Billionaire founder featured in business magazines across the country. Tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, confident stride. Yet every time she looked at him, part of her still saw the man carrying a janitor's cart through quiet hallways. Alexander stopped beside her desk. "Busy?" he asked. Charlotte smiled. "That depends. Is this a CEO visit or an Alex visit?" Alexander laughed. "Definitely an Alex visit." The answer made her smile wider. During the months following the reveal, their friendship had slowly deepened. At first, Charlotte struggled with the truth. Learning that someone she trusted had hidden such a significant secret was not easy. Alexander understood completely. He never pressured her. Instead, he earned her trust again the same way he had earned it the first time. Through honesty, through consistency, through showing up when it mattered. Little by little, the distance disappeared. "I have a question," Alexander said. "Should I be worried?" Charlotte teased. "Possibly." He handed her a small envelope. "Meet me on the rooftop at 6 o'clock. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspicious." "Trust me. I trusted you when you said you were a janitor." Alexander winced dramatically. "I suppose I deserve that." At exactly 6 o'clock, Charlotte stepped onto the rooftop terrace overlooking the Seattle skyline. The evening sunlight painted the water gold. Gentle wind drifted across the building. Strings of soft lights illuminated the space. Waiting near the edge of the terrace stood Alexander. For a moment, neither spoke. The city stretched endlessly around them. Then Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and removed something small. A folded blue handkerchief. Charlotte immediately recognized it. The same one she had given him on his first day in the lobby. The day Vanessa spilled coffee. The day she believed she was helping an ordinary janitor. Alexander carefully unfolded it. "Do you remember what you told me?" Charlotte smiled softly. "Probably not. You said everyone deserves a better start to Monday." She laughed. "That sounds like something I would say." Alexander nodded. "At the time, I thought I was testing an entire company." His voice grew quieter. "What I did not realize was that someone would end up changing me." Charlotte felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Alexander looked directly into her eyes. "I spent years evaluating performance, measuring success, and building businesses. Then I met a woman who reminded me that the most valuable things cannot be measured on spreadsheets." He stepped closer. Kindness, integrity, compassion. The city seemed to disappear around them. "Charlotte Bennett, you were the first person who treated me with respect when you believed I had nothing to offer you." He smiled. "That told me everything I needed to know." Then he reached into his pocket once more and revealed a small ring box. Charlotte's eyes widened instantly. Alexander took a steady breath. I started this journey searching for leaders. His smile softened. Instead, I found the person I want beside me for the rest of my life. He opened the box.